We recently passed 2,000 open repositories on GitHub. Even though we handle a lot of sensitive data, the source code is mostly safe to share, and so we do. And being publicly funded, I find it natural and appropriate that we be transparent about the code that we produce.
And we actually had to update the slides just this morning because there were more repositories. We wanted a number to be...
Exactly. So just this morning or late last night, there were 3 new open repositories. And if you want to learn more about NAV, or perhaps even apply for a job, you can visit desombetyrnoe.no and you'll meet these lovely ladies. So let's talk about front-end at NAV. And this is not a joke. This is part of our history. This system, Infotrygd, it's been in production since the late 70s. In fact, it's still in use, unfortunately, by a few people in some corner cases, but it's being actively phased out. Hopefully, we'll finish that this year. I wanted to share this just to give you a taste of what front-end at NAV means. Not that this by any means is the standard, but it's certainly part of it. And thinking about software on this timescale gives some perspective. I hope that the code I write today is long gone in 50 years, which is how long this has lived. But perhaps some of the foundation that we lay today will have some impact quite far into the future. Anyway, we have a few more legacy systems as well, this being a couple of case working applications. The front ends of these are mostly JSF, I believe. Java. We also have some more modern internal applications. So this is a couple of case working apps as well. They're written in React. And here's a selection of some of the externally available front ends. So in total, we've counted up to about 200 front end applications. As far as we can tell, it's a bit difficult to get an exact number and a complete overview in an organization this big. And they're built in a variety of technologies. It's mostly React these days, but there are plenty of exceptions. And that diversity we welcome. We see it as mostly a strength because the way we manage to stay agile and keep moving fast at this scale is by organizing into loosely coupled autonomous teams. Our culture of product development is centered around this cross-functional team who's responsible for all aspects of the product, from user research and UX design to development and security and legal compliance, everything. And what we gain by working in this way is that the coordination needed between teams to make changes is minimal. There's no handover between teams, and teams can act quickly on new ideas, new user insight, and change requirements. And teams can also make choices independently based on the needs of their users. And as a result, I believe, we get better services for people. But there are some potential costs as well. The complexity of being responsible for all aspects of the product quickly becomes overwhelming for a small team. And even if we only focus on front-end development, it's an enormous challenge. This looks like a lot, but it's only the front-end technologies. And in addition to this, building a modern web front-end includes aspects like accessibility, security, performance, deployment, analytics, the list goes on. This is complexity that teams have to manage in addition to the inherent complexities of their specific problem domain, which is really what they are here to do. So teams, they need help to handle this overload of complexity, which is where we come in.
Yes.
So this is me, Andreas. I'm a developer at heart, but I've dabbled in some design work. I'm really passionate about creating great user experiences, whatever that takes, like even if it's not only writing code. I started at NAV in 2020 in the middle of the first lockdown. There I act as the front-end community lead, but most of my time at NAV I've spent building the design system, Axel. So I'll talk a bit about that now. It's NAV's digital toolbox for product development. And the design system, it contains tools to make it fast and easy to build UIs at NAV for both developers and designers. And the building blocks it contains are central to how we're able to scale our UIs to build consistent user experience and to succeed in building accessible products as well. So it contains components and their styling, some design guidelines, and quite an extensive library of icons. But the artifacts, they're just tools. The real value is in the way the design system enables us to collaborate and share knowledge across teams and to continually iterate on our solutions at scale. And as an extension to our design system, we've established what we call a product development handbook with articles, blog posts on topics such as user research, accessibility, content strategy. Yeah, and as with all of our platform services, this is publicly available. You can find it by going to axel.nav.no. One of the things that I've learned working on the design system at NAV is it takes a long time to move such a large organization. So building a design system means changing how we work, and convincing that many people that this is the way forward is really hard. The key to scale that effort I've found is to build a strong community where people help each other.
And actually, Axel is quite a success story when it comes to collaboration between different government agencies. So not only is it open source and publicly available, we actually have meaningful contributions and meaningful collaboration with other entities. So we are sort of making something that's reusable and usable outside of NAV as well, which is really rewarding.
That's true. That's true. I would definitely call it a success story, Axel. But I've also come to realize that a design system is just simply not enough. Front-end developers, they have other needs that are not met. And I would go as far as to say that the way we work with front-end, it's a bit broken. But more on that later. Yeah. For now, I'll hand over to Hans Christian.
Yeah, so I'm still Hans Christian. So I'm a platform developer at heart. I've been developing application platforms for all of my professional career in public sector, in private sector, lots of financial institutions. I started a little bit later than Andreas in NAV, as late as in 2022. So I was the first batch with remote first employees. So I'm employed in Bergen, but the rest of my team is in Oslo. But they are for the most part working from their various home offices. And occasionally they may visit our lovely offices at Helsfyr, which I'm there 1 or 2 times a month to meet the team and to socialize. But all of the work and most of the socialization is done through digital means. So I'm an open source maintainer and developer for all of my career, as long as I've used computers, really. And I really have a strong passion for developer experience. So when Andreas had his vision, because it really, the credit goes so much to Andreas to really put front-end development first, and said that we really need, it's not enough to have sort of Axel and some tools here and there. We really need a platform as well. I was like, yes, let's do this, a new challenge, really. Because platform at NAV isn't really isn't really new. We started back in 2016. We got a new director of NAV director, got a new IT director that instead of being only project driven and that consultants in both ends, they actually started hiring people. And when you hire people, you get new ideas, you get creative people, and you get people with passion that really, really want to drive it forward. So they created a Kubernetes cluster, and the rest is really history. No. The rest is that we have today 1,600 applications on our Kubernetes-based application platform across on-premise, and more. We crossed the 50% mark to moving all of these to public cloud just before last summer. And we often sort of say it's nice to be a developer at NAV because our platform is called nice. And so, of course, you build your application, you deploy it, and you run it, and these autonomous cross-functional teams, they are still in control. They are not handing over anything. They get the tools, they get the self-service capabilities, and they get all of these extra services here for free. It's sort of a paved road. They get, of course, great connectivity, security out of the box, storage, and also monitoring, and being able to sort of be in charge and know exactly what's going on with their application. But sort of, this is made for primarily for backend application. It's made for these single-page application wasn't really a thing when our platform started. So there's something missing. It's a great platform, but there's still something missing. I had one more slide here. Sorry about that, Andreas.
No worries.
And it sort of was the building ground for creating other platforms at NAV as well. Because today we don't only have NICE, we have NADA, our data platform, we have Axel that Andreas has mentioned, our product development platform, we have research ops, we have Datajägarna, we have many other parts of the organization that all started after we sort of turned this around and said that we want to bring tools and make the developers and the product teams great and empower them.
I think it's worth mentioning as well that we deliver NICE also as a service to other correct. Organizations within the public sector, which is really cool. All right, so we've introduced you to NICE and we've introduced you to Axel. And they're both important parts of the current developer experience for front-end developers at NAV. But they don't cover all the needs of front-end developers. Like there's a gap, which you can clearly see in this diagram, I have to say, like there's a physical gap. So we need something more. Enter the green circle of front-end platform, yay. Which is, partly covered by NICE, it's partly covered by Axel, but how do we cover the rest? Like, how do we know what's missing? How do we know what problems are worth solving? To figure that out, we need to talk to these people. We need to understand their needs. But what even is a front-end developer? Like we're 16 minutes into this talk and we haven't even defined what we mean by that term. So we include not only those who identify as specialized front-end developers in this group. To us, everyone who writes front-end code is of interest. This certainly includes full-stack developers, and sometimes also like backend developers who are curious to learn. And we're also seeing an increasing number of designers who know how to code HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And we care about them too. So the quality of the front-end developer experience impacts all of these people. And being able to truly understand our users' needs, it requires empathy. It calls for us to place ourselves in our users' shoes to see their challenges and to understand their pain points. And empathy, it can only really be achieved if you respect your users. And I firmly believe that front-end development is real engineering. Or at least it can be if we let it. And that holds true even as some of the code might be written by designers. like there's this stigma against front end in our industry, and it's hindering our team's ability to perform. And I'll be the first to admit that there are certain aspects of front-end development that are not optimal, like JavaScript being the programming language of the web is the main one. But that shouldn't stop us from taking front-end seriously. Instead, I believe like it makes it all the more important for us to make an effort to change the way we work. You see, having a well-functioning front-end is essential to delivering great user experiences. And to achieve that, we need to we can't treat front-end development as any less of a discipline than other software development. Like the product that we're able to deliver is only as strong as the weakest link. And that's why we not only want it to be nice to be a developer at NAV, like we specify that it's nice to be a front-end developer at NAV. It's all about the developer experience of front-enders specifically. And it's our front-end developers who are the superstars building great products. Our job is just to enable them. So we roll out the red carpet and let them shine in the spotlight. Yeah, and it's no longer just us. Nope. We now have a small team. So Kim Tore has come on board, and Carl as well, who is here today. Yay! Hey, Carl. Cool. So this is us. And now let's get into sort of the meat of things. What have we actually been doing? What is this front-end platform? So we'll talk about how we're working with the community, building a community, but also learning from the community. We'll talk about content delivery network and how we've established that as sort of the first thing that we did. We'll talk about observability of front-end applications, why it's important, how we've achieved it, and what we hope we'll be able to do going forward. And we'll talk about feature toggling or feature management, which is sort of changing the way we can experiment with our applications. So first of all, quickly about the community. I've talked a bit about this already, but like specifically our community, I would say is mainly focused around a few Slack channels. Which are like very lively. People help each other, yeah. So it's a huge resource for us to learn, for us to help and ask questions of the community. We also have a bi-weekly meeting called the Frontend Forum, where we gather everyone who cares about frontend to talk about different topics. As part of this as well, we have written some documentation guides to spread knowledge, and we're working with teams, so helping them out if there's anything we can do to support, but also connecting teams so they can help each other in our community. And the last point is a really important one as well. Like the community is only as good as its members, so recruiting more front-end developers has been really important to us to strengthen our ability to deliver great front-end apps. All right, so CDN.
Yeah, and actually sort of this community, culture of communities across NAV, because this isn't only about front-end developers, we have this across multiple disciplines, and that was one of the reasons why I joined NAV, was this culture of building a community, because we are one of Norway's largest IT departments, I believe. And really, there's so much knowledge to be gained, so much knowledge to be shared. So that's really rewarding, and having a good tool like Slack really helps. Okay, so content delivery, CDN. You might sort of like, oh gosh darn it, it's 2023 already, and NAV doesn't have a CDN, really? Yeah, really. Well, we have now. But really, that was sort of the state, a little bit sad state of our front-end development and front-end developer story, that we didn't have a good place to stick our static assets and host them in a very snappy and efficient way. And this was one of, as Andreas already mentioned, this was the first platform service our team delivered, and in record time, I might add, because it was a little bit pressing. We actually had real challenges, and I'm a little bit ashamed that I didn't realize some of these until Andreas approached me and said that, do you know that when we deploy our front-end, some of our front-end applications, they break? And I was like, no, it can't be. The Kubernetes is working. Have trust in Kubernetes. No. You see, when we roll out, there is this rolling rollout in Kubernetes. And if you run Kubernetes in your organization, you should, I have some shaking hands, but if you run Kubernetes, you should pay attention here, and it's probably applicable to other platforms as well, because this is normal stuff here. So you have your browser, and it fetches your indexed HTML, and it has some references to some JavaScript and some CSS. And depending on your build tool, they might be content hashed. So meaning that the content, the hash of the actual content, it represented in the URL. So it's unique. So you can cache it, and you can get it, but it gets a new name. It gets a unique name. So if you only have one deployment, or the latest revision running rather, everything is fine. You get your CSS, you get your JavaScript. It's all served from the correct container. But if you do a deployment, the default method for Kubernetes is doing a rolling rollout, which means that at some point you might have some of the old ones running and some of the new ones running. So you reload your page, you get the new HTML, it has some new references to the CSS and JavaScript. So the first one might go okay, it's routed to the new container. But guess what? The second one, because this is a sort of, depending on how many containers you have or pods, it's a 50-50 chance. It's an equal chance to hit all of them. So if you're unlucky, as some of your users might be when you're rolling out, they get a 404 because that new file isn't present on the old version of your application. And it's sort of, when I realized this, I was like, oh, really? Yeah, this, of course. This is how Kubernetes works. And our teams have sort of created, invented creative workarounds to solve this problem. Sort of how they, if it didn't find the specific version, it would just serve the latest one, or rolling out when there were low traffic, or just knowing that this would happen and without caring or without having the ability to actually fix it themselves. So the solution is of course pretty obvious. It's stick these assets here on a CDN, and it doesn't really matter which version of the application. You get your index HTML, it has some reference, and these files are always present. You have the old ones and the new ones and different revisions as well. So our current solution looks like this. We have cdn.nav.no, so we have a global CDN for all of Nav. Goes through a load balancer, it goes through Google Cloud CDN network, and it then enters a cloud storage bucket where the actual assets are hosted. These assets here, they are owned by the teams, so they, of course, commit it to Git. If it doesn't exist in Git, it doesn't exist, really. Then there's a GitHub Actions workflow that will compile your application and then place your assets, your CSS and JavaScript and maybe HTML and images, optimized images, etc., onto that bucket, and it's ready to be served by the world. And we don't only have one bucket, we have partitioned our CDN, so every team gets their own namespace. You get the CDN, you get the CDN. Well, guess there's one CDN, but it's different namespaces, so they only have access to their team's folder, you might say, so they cannot mess up for the other teams. So that's really great. And we have sort of taken it further as well and started integrating CDN with our Kubernetes-based application environment. So this might be familiar for those of you running Kubernetes. You have your load balancer, your ingress controller, and then you have some ingress configurations. They point to some services that point to some pods. So this is a fairly standard setup of something running inside Kubernetes. Well, did you know that you can actually trick Kubernetes to trick the services to not only point to something inside your cluster, you can actually point to something elsewhere. It's called an external name. So we can actually, if it's a single page application that doesn't really need any server-side rendering or any backends in itself, we can serve all of these really static assets directly from the CDN. So we can bypass having to build a container, probably with the Nginx inside, in order to just serve up static files. We can just point the service directly to the address for the CDN, or the bucket rather, and then it's served within the normal routes. So it looks and feels like a normal application. It's on the same domains. You don't have coarse problematics because it's not on a separate DNS somewhere. So it fits really, really nicely into our sort of existing realm for those applications that doesn't need a server-side rendering, that I might add. Some might need that, so then they can do this directly. And then sort of going back to sort of I mentioned that we have a great platform. It comes with sort of monitoring and observability built in for backend applications, I might add. It's really, really great if you have a container and if your code really is running inside a container. For front-end applications, containers is a sort of a strange concept because the runtime of a front-end application is the browser. It's somewhere completely distributed elsewhere. It's not in our data center. It's certainly not a container. It's out in the edge, in the field, in the hands of our users. So everything that we really have with logs, with metrics, with tracing, what we call observability, really doesn't really apply to any of our front-end applications. They have had to invent new sort of tools and techniques in order to collect logs, to get their performance metrics, and I guess no one does tracing for our front-end applications. And I guess also alerts is fairly absent for our front-end applications. So it's really a sad state there. And it's sort of reflected when we sort of count up, oh, we have that tool, we have this tool, we have that, this, and that. And it's very, very fragmented. And some of it is caused by sort of having a little bit legacy there, a little bit newer things there, a little bit Kubernetes there. Some of these are proprietary, and they cost they're really expensive as well. I don't know why monitoring tools are so expensive, but they are. So we can't really use it for everything. We need to be sort of a little bit constrained with how much we can put into it, how many users, how many applications. Oh, it's really horrible, I should say. So, but our goal really isn't to have one tool to rule them all, rather it's having one standard to rule them all. And enter that standard, it's open telemetry. And it's maybe one of the largest things in the cloud-native ecosystem, second from Kubernetes. But it's still a little bit early. You might have heard about it. It's an open standard for building in application telemetry. So instead of observing your application from the outside, like a black box, you actually build in those metrics. And it's a similar saying to security. You don't bolt on security at the end. Similarly, you don't bolt on monitoring at the end. It's a very bad practice. You build it in from the start. And of course, it helps if the ones building it are also the ones responsible for running it. So they have some incentive to build in the correct metrics. But of course, you have logs, you have metrics. So logs being very unstructured takes a lot of lots of space. It's really hard to sort of get the gist of everything. It's very nice if you know where to look, and you should, oh, it's this exception here. But sort of having, oh, does it use that much memory? Does the request take this long? That's not a good use of logs. Then you have metrics. They are aggregated across all of the events. And then I guess a very, very few % in this room is doing anything with distributed tracing. Because that's the practice of knowing that you have, when something happens in your system when a user clicks on something, there's an API, there's a request sent to an API, it sends further requests to databases, to storage system, to other services. And seeing that call chain there is really, really important to know how long time did it take, what extra queries did it involve, how long time did they take, and if something error occurs, where did that happen? The user just see that they got a 500 error from the API, but you can actually see that, oh, it was this downstream service here, 2 or 3 services down the line, that was where it caused the error. So it's really, really powerful, but it requires applications to be instrumented. And OpenTelemetry is this instrumentation we have been looking for. So it collects and it transfers. It doesn't store, it doesn't display, it's not a storage system, it's only these SDKs and libraries that you use to instrument your application. And they exist for .NET, they exist for Go, for Java, for all of the programming languages, and many of the popular and highly used frameworks as well. So you can get up and running in very short time. And actually, if this is interesting, there's actually a talk later today by Martin about OpenTelemetry. So if this is interesting, go to his talk at 3 o'clock in room 4. But sort of, this is great. It's great to have a standard. And there's JavaScript libraries for OpenTelemetry. But it's still, for the client-side application, it still leaves a lot to be desired. It's still a high bar to actually instrument your application with OpenTelemetry. Say if you have a React application. Enters an open source project from Grafana Faro, and it's a web SDK specifically targeted rich and dynamic client applications to get all of these metrics here up and running and integrating with your application, and then being able to send this off to a compatible backend with backend compatible with the OpenTelemetry protocols. And this is actually a dashboard that really shows what you get out of the box. You get these web vitals, Google call them, which is sort of how long time did it take to load your page? How long time did it take to render it? How are the different actions across your page? How's the percentile of the timing here? And then you can use it to build in metrics from certain events. You can build in tracing, so you can actually know that when the user clicked that button, that spawned events further into our systems, our network, our microservices, into our database, etc. And you can actually see the correlation there. So it's really, really powerful and something we have a strong belief in at NAV. But we do know that this takes time. We have 1,600 applications, and our goal is to collect them all, instrument them all. But we can offer teams that sort of reward from the first application, but the long term, the larger goal here is to get a critical mass of them instrumented, because then we can really, really see the power. And we are not locked down to proprietary system. We can change out if we need to, as long as it's compatible with OpenTelemetry. And guess what? Most of the modern systems are compatible with OpenTelemetry. So go home and check if your monitoring system of choice, if it supports OpenTelemetry protocol and data. So next up, feature management. Anyone using feature management or feature toggling? Yeah, a few. Nice. So feature management is the practice of decoupling deployment, the technical deployment of a newly built or changed application to the release of features in the hands of your users. So those are two different things. The one is sort of, you have technical task of building something, and then you need to know, does it work? Is it the right thing? Is it the right thing for the right users, etc. So this enables you to do gradual rollout, where you can say that a certain percentage of my users, they will get access to this feature. Or it might be a certain user group. You have identified that these are the users that are the forward-leaning, they can tolerate a little bit instability and something breaking every now and then, and they really rewarded of seeing and getting to use the new features. And you can also use this to do A/B testing. And if you're not unsure if the developers are in disagreement with product management with regards to how the features should be implemented, you can implement them both, and then you can compare and see which one is performing the best. But it does rely on having good metrics. So it's not coincident that this this slide is after the monitoring part, because we do need good data in order to know that if our features are the right features and that we can start experimenting with them. And you also have the inverse of feature toggling. You can have feature off toggling or rollback or fail switches or whatever you might call them. You can actually, if something starts breaking and you think that this is caused by this new feature, you can turn it off, and hopefully, if you've done things correctly at least, your app will resume working normally, minus the new feature, of course. So at NAV, we have had great success using an open source feature management tool called Unleash. The current version we have is a little bit out of date, and it haven't received as much love that we would have liked it to be, or at least our team liked it to be. So we took it on ourselves to sort of reboot this and get this up and running in a better state. And we created something we have called Unleashrator. And it sort of ties into our Kubernetes universe. We have a lot of these operators in our Kubernetes clusters, Unleashrator being the 12th of them. So it manages our fleet of Unleash instances. So in our new setup, every team will get their own instance, so they cannot interfere with one another. This is done for scaling, for resiliency, and also for sort of privacy and access control management as well. So we do have a management cluster, and we have our application clusters. We have two of them. We have dev and we have prod. So Unleashrator will then manage a new Unleash instance for a team. It will then federate that instance or notify our application cluster that there is a new instance available. It will make sure that there's a shadow copy or a proxy available in the team's namespace, and that the team can then start access it. So they can use their backend applications to access the feature toggling, fetch if there are certain features that should be enabled or disabled. But even more importantly, and especially for the purpose of this talk, we are now able to offer this for our front-end application. Previously, our version of Unleash didn't really support web-based feature toggling, and it was certainly not set up in a way that sort of enabled this out of the box. With our new setup and using the Unleash Edge proxy, we are now able to offer that in a secure and a resilient manner to offer sort of feature toggling in the front end. And that is really where we believe that feature management really shines, where you can have different parts, different implementation of the user interface and subtle changes. And there is this saying that when you are browsing the hyperscalers services, 80% of the time you are in one of these experiments. You get a slightly different experience than your neighbor and your peers does. Because that's the way that modern feature rollout happens. That is the way that high-performing teams know that their features are ready for prime time. They don't have them standing in an idle test environment, and every now and then a tester will come in and try to click around. They will actually deploy their features into production, knowing that it's not ready, but also knowing that only a certain percentage or a certain groups of my users will actually get to experience this first, for the good and the bad, and having the ability to learn and growing confidence that you can take that slider from 1% to 10% to 50% and all the way up to 100% availability of the new features. So with that, we lift our sort of eyes a little bit more, a little bit higher to the back of the room and look into the sort of looking glass. What's ahead? Now we have talked in great length about how we have what we have done so far and how we have worked on getting that up and running. So just to reiterate, we sort of deployed our CDN back in November actually, we have onboarded new team members to our nice front-end team. We have created new versions of Unleash. We have Grafana Faro. And we are aiming for a sort of general availability over the summer. And then we are sort of ready to think a little bit more longer term, because there are so much exciting things going on, especially in the front-end realm, and with different standards and different technologies and practices. So I'm curious, Andreas, what are you excited about?
So there's a lot that I'm excited about, but what I might be rather more interested in going forward now is the stuff that is perhaps not as exciting. So it's documentation, writing guides, helping onboard new teams to the services that we provide. It's not a build it and they will come sort of mindset. We have to drive that adoption and help people succeed in using the software. And especially then for the observability and web vitals, I'm looking forward to seeing how measuring those performance metrics can drive a change for improved performance, but also a reduced complexity for teams by shipping less JavaScript. I think that's really a trend in the market right now that I'm excited about. And I'm also really excited about micro-frontends and web components, especially the combination of the two. So they're both exciting on their own. So doing micro-frontends to get some of the value of a microservice architecture and taking that to the front end, it can help our teams collaborate in new ways, and it has already. We're succeeding with this in several places. It's also helping us to do a strangler pattern on the front end. So gradually moving away from old technology and bringing it into modern standards, which is great. Which has been a difficult thing to do on the front end before. And then web components, actually doing component development on an open standard. So right now our design system, the components that we've built there are locked into React, which really limits the abilities for teams to make their own technology decisions. So moving that more towards an open standard and at the same time future-proofing how we build reusable components. And then the combination of these two is like really exciting. So building or defining contracts, APIs, and helping teams collaborate and components really work together to compose the great experiences of the future. And so we talk a lot about this at NAV these days, and I'm excited to see how the development is going forward. We're also talking to people outside of NAV, so our friends at Finn, I know, have come a long way in doing this, which is really exciting, and I'm really curious to hear you guys, what your thoughts are on this, so please come talk to me later about micro frontends and web components, which I find really exciting. How about you, Hans-Christian? What do you find exciting these days?
Yeah, again, sort of we have seen how sort of containers on the server side, how that have enabled autonomy and our teams to use the tools and languages and frameworks of choice, moving from only Java to more Kotlin to Node to Go, even some Rust maybe, .NET probably. And sort of if we can get the same there on the front end side, that would be really, really great, because we are currently missing that, I believe. I think GraphQL, I know there are teams at NAV looking at that, but seeing if we can make some services, some platform services in order to make GraphQL development even better and making sort of APIs available across teams. But maybe maybe what's in, at least to my heart, really, really interesting is this notion what if our containers did not have to run all the time? We are a container-based operation, as I said. But there's two folds here. The first is sort of from an environment perspective. If we could turn off as much as possible and everything that's not used during night times, during weekend, during holidays, etc., when it's not in use, that would actually reduce our carbon footprint a lot. And the second part is, what if we could remove this aspect of the container from our backend development focus? We already talked about that for our sort of application, front-end applications. What if we can do a little bit the same for our backend application as well? And imagine if you have a rich dynamic front-end, you might only need a small part, maybe a function, I might say, for your backend application part. So there's a very, very exciting open source project called Knative. It's under the same umbrella governing Kubernetes, Prometheus, open telemetry. And it does exactly that. It does sort of on-demand running your applications, whether that is HTTP request and it spins up as many pods that you need, or it's on events. So we use a lot of Kafka at NAV. So imagine that you could just run your application when there are events on your Kafka topic, or there have happened something in the Postgres database, or there's a new file or something on the object storage that we are using. And a recent sort of new, not invention, but an extension or a newer version of Knative, they have got this called functions. So similar to cloud functions that you will find on the other cloud providers, but it's not proprietary to the cloud provider, and it's an open standard, and it runs perfectly fine side by side. And this is an example of writing a very, very tiny Go application, and how quickly you can then create this and get it up and running, and it can be served either over HTTP as an API of some sort, or you can tie it to your Kafka event. So this is really, really something that I'm excited for, looking forward towards.
And for more specialized front-end developers as well, certainly not having to interface with like a Docker image to build your server-side rendering or your backend for front-end, whatever it is, but writing just a function. It's a lot easier.
So if you're already in TypeScript and you have your front-end application writing a tiny TypeScript function that does some handling of some event, that comes very natural to some of these application and our application developers. So we really feel that this won't sort of take over all of our application, but for a huge amount of them, this can be really, really powerful. So wrapping it up, I really, really hope that we have been able to emphasize our love for front-end and front-end developers at NAV, and really, really putting them up and lifting it and treating them as first-class citizens. And keep in mind, these things are still early. Our services, the landscape, and some of the abstractions, some of the standards are really, really early. And we have great hopes for them, but we know that there will be rough edges, and we need to continuously adapt. We have a strong belief in open standards and open source, and we are going there first before we try other alternatives, and especially when we are making our platform services that should be available to all developers at NAV, it's really important to us that we don't limit their choices of technology and how they want to proceed. And this really, really ties in to our sort of focus on the developer experience at NAV. We have a great developer experience for our backend developers, and it should be equally great for our front-end developers. So with that, before opening for questions, and just a shameless plug that we have a workshop tomorrow. Jan Kåre is with me. Wave your hand, Jan Kåre. We are doing a supply chain security workshop. And then Einar Høst, our great, great thought leader at NAV, is doing a talk on Friday on modeling versus reality. So I really, really encourage you all to check those out. And with that, we open for questions. Everything is crystal clear.
Thank you. And feel free to approach us later on.
There's a question there.
How many developers, front-end developers, do you think you have in teams, and how many is already onboarded to the front-end platform right now?
So the question is, how many front-end developers do we have in the teams, and how many teams are onboarding to the front-end platform. Would you like to answer that, Andreas?
So we don't have an exact number, and again, it depends on how you define a front-end developer. But I know specialized front-end developers, there's only a handful, so maybe like 20, something like that. But then a lot of people are working across the stack and will call themselves full stackers. So perhaps that's like half. Like it's a question of identity as well, you know, like who identifies as a front-end developers. I think.
Rephrase that question then?
Yeah.
How many people attend your, on average, the front-end forum?
Ooh, so we've had as many as like 80.
Yeah. Just reiterating for those in the back and also watching digitally. So the question was, how many are attending our front-end forums?
Yeah.
And maybe also you can say about the Slack channels as well.
Sure, yeah. Ooh, I don't have the exact numbers for those, but for the front-end forum, we've had as many as like 80 towards 90. But normally it's like between 50 and 60, I'd say. A lot of them being digital, but a few physical as well. For the Slack channels, I think the developer channel has like 800 something, and then the front-end one has 259.
Yeah.
It's the latest number.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then how many users of the front-end platform? How many users does the CDN have right now?
Yeah, so it's a little bit, we have about 20 teams, I guess, and then we don't have specific metrics for how many applications are the teams, but on average, I guess a team will have something from 5 to 15 services at least that they manage in their portfolio. So it's still quite early, and there's this huge variety that Andreas talked to about our oldest systems, Infotrygd, that's completely DOS-based, and all the way to our latest and greatest Next.js applications. And of course, those that have been onboarded to the front-end platform so far are in that scale of being on the latest and greatest and being quite forward-leaning and having also the room. Not all teams have equal amount of sort of breathing space. Some of them are really, really bogged down with existing tasks and sort of the legacy that they need to maintain, and they don't really have that breathing room to look up and sort of go on to the next technical thing. Yep. But our goal, of course, is that these services here should be applicable to all of our front-end applications. But it's similar to our back-end services as well. It's completely optional. We have no mandate to require them to use them. It should only be a service. Yep. And that sort of puts the pressure a little bit on us as well, because if we make something that no one uses, we are out of a job. So I really need to wake up and really put my best foot forward and bring my A game in order to build the best services that all of our front-end developers can make use of.
Was that another question in the back?
Yeah. With that many deployments, how do you manage your desired state? Because you have so many people that can fill with something.
Yeah. So the question is, with so many applications and so many deployments, how do we manage that state across all of our applications? It's subdivided, so every team gets their own namespace, so they cannot mess up their neighbors and other teams' namespaces. So we take a little bit easy way out and say that it's the team's responsibility. We encourage them to have as simple process as possible, and that's sort of what our tools is also sort of gearing towards, that we are not having multiple test environments. We are encouraging them to have only one test environment and then rolling out to production and having feature pull requests that are merged into the main line and then deployed out to production as quickly as possible and using some of the DORA metrics there. And that's again why we emphasize the importance of feature management, feature toggling. We do recognize that features take time to mature to be complete, but we certainly don't want them to be lingering in and sort of off the side branch or test environment for long time, or any time actually. We want them to be merged in as soon as you know that the quality and the security part of the code is sufficient. And then we want the new feature to be turned off by default, and then only enabled for those users that are should be seeing them. And for your test environment, that might be your developers, and for your production environment, you might have singled out certain users or certain user groups that get access to the new features.
Any more questions? Yeah, I mean, if you have questions afterwards, feel free to approach us. There's one last question we have time for.
How do you handle content management across all your applications? As in text delivered by a business side, for instance, in your React application?
Right, so how do we manage content delivery or content management at scale?
Sanity?
Yeah, so we actually have a few different content management systems. And just as in other applications, they're owned, like content for that domain is owned by that team. Largely, there are exceptions, of course, but then they're also responsible for enabling sharing of that content so that it can be used in different contexts. So on the website, for example, or in customer support, people answering the phone, or chats, or several different channels. But that's really a desired state that I'm describing, and we're not there at the moment. This is one of the pain points, and it impacts the developer experience of front-end developers a lot. So it's something we want to tackle going forward. But I think distributing the responsibility, again, is the answer for us.
But technically right now, NAV is mainly a Nonic XP,
Yep.
right? It's a headless CMS, and then there's also teams using Sanity, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. And quite a bit of the customer support content is maintained in Salesforce. So there's quite a few systems.
Yeah. A good question.
Yeah. With that, I think we've run out of time.
Yep.
So thank you very much.
We have stickers if someone wants stickers.